is Waylon Lewis of Elephant Journal, and I am back with an amazing guest. We say that about all the guests. Um, but genuinely, I am here with Sharon Salzberg, the beloved Buddhist teacher. So you can ask all your questions about why you are suffering and how to live a real life. Here's Sharon.
Hello, here we're live.
Yes. So where in the world are you?
I'm in Barre, Massachusetts,
Oh yeah,
next
of
door to the
course you are.
Insight Meditation Society.
I have to make sure I'm muted. There we go. Yeah, of course you're there. So you have a new book for us. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Yeah, I like this book. It was really amazing to write something without traveling all the time, without uh appearing, in different places teaching and to be more sequestered, and it's
Oh, you're
great.
talking about like you wrote it during the pandemic.
I wrote it during the pandemic.
Yeah. That was like a writer's dream.
Yeah,
Pandemic for most people was awful. For writers and perhaps introverts, it was about time. Yeah.
yeah, it was different because we're
Yeah. And
different.
ironically, talking about the pandemic, the book is titled Real Life. So what is the focus of this latest book?
Well, it was actually I was here in Barry, really in lockdown, for a variety of different reasons. And I watched this show on YouTube called Saturday Night Seder, which was about the Passover Seder. And it reminded me that symbolically, first of all, it's about a journey of all people at all times seeking freedom.
The
And it was
Seder.
about the Seder is,
Yeah.
and also symbolically, not having anything to do with geopolitics. The word Egypt means a narrow place,
Mm.
a confined place. So it's the journey from feeling confined and narrow and no options, and I can't breathe, and to freedom. And so that became the arc of the book. I looked at that
Mm.
and I thought, there's a book.
Ah. So, yeah, the focus, in a funny way, seems, some of your other books have focused on how to be a part of creating, like my Buddhist community likes to say, creating an enlightened society, like how to be helpful, part of change. This is more focused, if I have it right, on living a meaningful life and dealing with, all the challenges and obstacles and difficult emotions that come up. Is that
Yeah,
a
I think
fair
it's
assessment?
yeah, that's very fair. And I think it's thank you for understanding. I think it's also how do you deal with, like, not just feeling fear, but a kind of overwhelm of fear? And how do you deal with that sense of life has forgotten me, it's left me behind? Or how do you deal with all these difficulties? Because, so much of our conditioning says fight it and do battle with it and hate it, be ashamed of it, but that doesn't work.
Yeah.
So it's a whole other model of, like, how do I deal with this in a way that's more open and spacious and free? And then not only that, that's a big part of it, but it's not only that, it's also how do I remember to take in the joy, and
Mhm.
cultivate the good and actually take delight
Mm.
in things that I can experience in a moment. It's not a huge journey
Mm.
if we're paying attention differently. Um,
So, yeah, my incredibly piercing and intelligent question would be, how do we do
how
that?
do we do it? Uh, uh, well, in terms of the first part,
Yeah.
dealing with the
Well, because
difficulty.
to be a little more grounded, like so many of us did struggle during the pandemic. And as we know from the Buddhist Four Noble Truths, like there's some fundamental confusion and suffering going on. So many people are having a hard time, um, kind of irrespective of what's
Yeah,
happening in the world.
yeah, yeah.
So how do we deal with that without, as you said, without shame or but with also without defending it or trying to get
Yeah,
out of it or whatever?
exactly. Well, that's, you can always say training,
Mm.
give yourself a break. Don't expect to be able to do it automatically. Because
Right.
most of us were not all of us, but most of us were not conditioned that way.
Yeah.
And so we call it mindfulness. I have also in there in the book, Sunday Rinpoche's description of shake hands, where he talks about those states, like, and again, I don't want to be talking about just feeling something, but when it's really strong and taking over, that's a different thing altogether. And so he talks about meeting them. He calls them our beautiful monsters.
Mm.
And he talks about shake their hand, like there's a sense of being present and more balanced. And accepting that this is what's happening right now. It doesn't mean you're accepting it for the future. Like people think acceptance is succumbing and it's different,
Right.
you
So
know?
you're saying like with emotional, like
Yeah,
klesha, we call it, but like really awful moments in our life or when we're just
yeah,
overwhelmed, you shake the hand, you
that's right.
just accept
That's
this
where we
is
start.
what's going on.
Right, exactly. That's where we start. So there's kindness in there. There are lots of kind of secret qualities in there,
Yeah.
or more secret. There's kindness, there's presence, there's almost a kind of hospitality. Like, yeah,
Well, you and
you
Pema have been my, and many people's reference points for loving kindness, Maitri. So there's some level of like being kind to yourself, but also coupled with
that's
honesty.
right.
Like where you're not like ego's kindness to ourselves is letting us get away with stuff and be slippery, right? It's
That's
not
right.
that.
That's exactly right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, and you could say a vast, vast, vast oversimplification of should practice, you'd say, like, invite those monsters in for dinner.
Mm,
Don't let them run around the house, but because that's scary. That is dangerous. But you don't have to be so frightened. You don't have to be so kind of putting yourself down like I can't
I
handle
see.
this. We can handle this because awareness can handle this.
I see. So the inviting in for dinner is sort of like they're a guest. You treat them with respect, even warmth, but you don't let them run around the house breaking china.
That's right, exactly. And
Yeah.
like I once used that example with some group, and somebody in the group didn't like it, and so I said, "Okay, how about invite them in for a cup of tea?"
Mm.
And they said, "How about a cup of tea to go?" And I said, "Okay, if that's the extent of your hospitality, fine.
Yeah.
That is just fine." Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah. Give them, yeah. You could like give them a cup of water as they run by doing one of those like marathons.
exactly. Like,
Yeah.
which is better than how we normally are.
Yeah. So, it's very timely in a selfish way, but hopefully this connects with many, many people who have had a hard time. But, in my last year, I went through all these like, it was one of the first times in my life I felt really overwhelmed by sort of loss and change. And, and it was kind of a delightful experience from the dark Buddhist humor that you probably love like myself, where you're like, okay, I'm throwing all the Maitri and meditation at this. And I'm still sitting here with the what was it, delightful monster
Yeah,
who's like not
you're
getting
beautiful
up and
monsters.
leaving.
That's right.
So
Still here.
acceptance is a radical thing. It's not like a
Mhm.
trick. It's like
That's
you
right.
actually have to like how do you how do you actually live real life like you're writing about?
Well, when I think of myself at 18, which is the age I went to India at to learn how to meditate, and if I was going to describe myself in one word, it would be fragmented. I was just fragmented. I was in pieces. And I had this wild instinct that if I could learn how to meditate, I could weave the pieces together and feel whole. Not always happy, but whole.
Mm,
And I was right. And
yeah.
I acted totally out of character because I was, a very frightened young person. I was
Mm,
uh, not bold. I was go to school in Buffalo, New York. I grew up in New York City. I'd never even been to California. And
wow.
I wanted to learn how to meditate. I looked around Buffalo. I didn't see it anywhere because it was a long time ago that I was 18. And the school had an independent study program within the American Studies Department. And if you created a project they liked, you could go anywhere in the world theoretically for a year. So I created a project. I said, I want to go to India and study meditation. And they approved it. And off I went. They think that was crazy. Like, what was I thinking? It wasn't thinking, I'll do graduate
Yeah.
study on it or,
It's interesting how
someday.
brave we are
Yeah.
when it's something you're passionate about. Like
Yeah.
maybe
Yeah.
everything in the world was scary, but you
Yeah.
felt drawn to this thing
Yeah.
and it made you like Jane Goodall says the same thing. She was like a little girl, like cloistered in England, but she had this dream and it was like,
Yeah.
yeah.
And so up I went and everything followed from there. And I was totally right. That instinct was completely correct.
I wonder how do you, even with the books, even with the excerpts, right? Even a chapter, there's this irritating quality to like Instagram and, everything that Elephant we're doing all the time. We have to share. I mean, it's just human nature. It's no one's fault really, but we have to share like a quote. We have to do this and that. And then when I talk with you or any real Buddhist teacher, um, one of the first like advice when I ask a question is, well, you have to train, you have to meditate. You actually have to practice. You're going to get it wrong a million times, even after you've meditated for 40 years or whatever. Um, but I feel like that's lost in our kind of social media culture where it's like a quote and people love the quote. But like, I guess my question is like, how can those listening or those even reading your book go beyond the kind of, you know, quote culture? A quote won't change our life, won't help us deal with loss or suffering, or joy, living real life fully. How do we get beyond kind of this speedy quote culture into real life?
But sometimes I think we actually need one another for that,
Mm.
and so people, because it is hard. I mean, I think you pointed to something really, really important, which is taking something we admire in the abstract and bringing it to life. That's the hardest step, you know, because you can hear, as I've heard, as you probably heard, you don't have to sit 8 hours a day, in order to accomplish something. It's like short moments many times. Bring it to life many times, even briefly. Um, but do we do it? That's the real leap, as not just think about it, or that was so cool 2,600 years ago when Buddha was here, it's like, okay, me, what about me? And it's precisely what happened to me in Buffalo, New York. It's like I said in the most beautiful and important way. What about me?
Hmm.
Wasn't selfish, it wasn't self-centered, it was essential.
Like, what do I do about my
Yeah,
fragmented
exactly.
way of being?
Exactly. And so sometimes, you know, it could be active, it could be meditation, it has to be reasonable. Like for the next 2 weeks, I'm going to meditate every day for 10 minutes or something, whatever is actually reasonable and doable. Or it could be action. Like I have friends who say to me, I found a gratitude buddy.
Mm,
And every day, by the end of the day, we're going to text each other
mm.
something we're grateful for from the day. And it could be so small in my conventional understanding,
Yeah,
but it's just that attitude, it's that spirit that's really important.
I love that. Yeah, my Buddhist community could be sort of. How do you feel about like? I know gratitude practice is like hard to criticize, but the sort of affirmation culture again gets into like the quote thing. Like if I just, you remember Saturday Night Live, like I'm good
I
enough,
know,
I'm smart enough, and gosh darn it,
I
people
know,
like me. Like,
I know.
you know, what I love about meditation, I'm a long time, I grew up Buddhist, but I meditate. I'm pointing over at my bed. I wake up and then I sit on the edge of my bed and I meditate and I dedicate the merit. And those 5 minutes, sometimes longer if I'm a little nuts,
Mm,
but usually like 5 minutes,
mhm,
and then
mhm.
5 minutes before I go to bed. Is that something you recommend to everyone?
Absolutely. I mean, Amishi Job is neuroscientist at the University of Miami. She studies a lot of meditation and mindfulness in like high performance athletes and military first responders and people like high stress. And she says 12 minutes a day will do it.
Wow.
And I always tease her and I say, well, I don't know if going to the bare minimum is, that healthy, but,
Yeah.
and she also says 3 to 5 times a week. And here self-knowledge plays it. I say to her, that doesn't work for me. Cause if for me, if we were Monday, I'd say, I'll start on Wednesday. Then it's Wednesday. I'll say, I'll do it 3 times on Saturday.
Yeah.
I never do it, but every day is every day. So
Yeah.
when you sense what is a good kind of structure for you that's reasonable
Yeah.
and doable, and then have a fairly short-term commitment to actually doing it, that's what's most important.
Amen. I mean, I think, everyone can argue about the time and whatever, but 90% of us who are arguing about the time aren't doing it at all. So it's like important for us to just commit to 5 minutes. I meditate when I go to bed. It could be as short as 2 minutes,
Yeah.
but I wait for that moment when I'm actually more or less fully present with my breath. And if I get excited about being fully present with my breath, that doesn't
It's
count. Like I have
yeah.
to actually do it.
Yeah.
And then you know, and I love that you encourage that. And then, for people like you and me, and hopefully everyone, once you're doing that and it's part of your life, it doesn't become homework. It becomes like brushing your teeth. You feel so much
Yeah.
better when you
Yeah.
do it. And then you can do a longer retreat, right?
Oh yeah. I mean, you could do it both ways. You could sort of sprinkle more mindfulness into your day,
Right.
not always be multitasking. And you can also do retreats. It's actually it's a very, very simple way of life for a fairly brief period where you're not responsible for so many other things, just that development of awareness and kindness and so on.
What do you think? I mean, I'm a man, like the male culture, the toxic masculinity kind of culture. I've been really, I ran into it recently when I was sort of oy veying about like some of my kind of what you were writing about with your book, the sadnesses or the obstacles or the hard times. And, I come from this Buddhist perspective, I think, where it's like being vulnerable is like not complaining. It's just being human, and being vulnerable and being honest can also be joyful. And it's not saying, oh, everything's awful. And then a friend who's a Buddhist and a man was like, shut up and toughen up, basically. And I had this moment of being like, I don't really feel like I'm complaining, honestly. I feel like I'm being open, and I'm hopefully normalizing that for men who maybe aren't comfortable lo- losing I mean, we're kind of in this like when culture. So, what is that line between being vulnerable genuinely and just kind of, uh, you know, covering it up in shame, like you mentioned, because you're embarrassed to talk about it, or bragging about it? There's also the sort of emotionalism on social media where you're like, my life is worse than yours. Give me internet likes. Do you know what I'm saying?
I
Like,
know
how,
exactly what you're
yeah.
saying. I'm thinking, I'm gonna spend all that much time on social media. I guess
Well,
there's a
there's a
world.
culture, just to be clear, there's a culture on Instagram where you're like, it's sort of like we used to call it like the Woody Allen school of movies. Like if you've gone through anything, you talk about it endlessly and complain about it, and it becomes sort of almost something you're proud of. Like we're not proud of our vulnerability. We're just
Mhm.
open.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think we're also not awfully used to looking back at our intention, our motivation, which would be a good skill to add. Like, why am I actually doing this? Like, what do I hope, or what's the best result? It's like, well, sometimes they say, I'm teaching like an organization or a group or something like that, and you're going into a meeting just to do this little pivot and ask yourself, what do I want to see most come out of this?
Right.
Do I want a resolution, or do I want to grind them into dust? Do I want to appear right
Right.
and righteous? Or do I want to help mentor somebody? Just to know, like, it's that little twist of what's my motive? What would make me really happy as an outcome?
And it's
And
a
I have,
huge twist too. It's
yeah,
like, what's your motivation for writing? You want
yeah,
to be like
exactly.
famous and a
Yeah,
guru and the next Buddha, or you actually want to help people and be
yeah,
genuine?
yeah, yeah. And it's just not a habit we have. And it's also something we could have put down, like, oh, what do you mean your intention?
Yeah.
But it's important. It's really essential. And so that would reveal a lot, right? Right there. And I also agree that I almost like translate vulnerability as honesty. It's truthfulness, just
I
being
like
truthful,
I like that.
and it may not be you want to be that vulnerable in every single context. It's like you're in a certain kind of meeting. Maybe that's not the time, to
Yeah.
be tough. I mean, you don't have to be dishonest, but you may not want to be candid, but maybe you do, it just depends. And
Yeah, it's funny because, I've been running a business we for many years had like 35 employees, and everyone says they want transparency, sort of enlightened business. But then you give people transparency and they're like, we didn't want to hear that. So yeah, there is a discernment
yeah,
that has to go
yeah,
with it, I think.
yeah.
Yeah. So interesting. Um, so so what else to talk about?
Well, I think, it contrasts that fragmented me, to the life I think we all can access. Absolutely. As a more full on human being. And someone once asked me why I meditated. And I just had one of those experiences. You just say something, you pre-plan it, And apparently I said, I sit down and get real. And
Mhm.
they love that. They're always quoting it back to me. And I said, I guess I said
Mhm.
that, Uh, But it has a lot to do, I think, what we were just talking about. It's being more authentic, not having the feeling of like if they only found out what I really thought, just being oneself. And then, I mean, sometimes people use the word authentic in a kind of stupid way, like they're putting everyone down and they really mean, but they're so authentic. They don't hide it,
Right.
and it's not really worth pursuing. Uh, but, there are things that are worth pursuing. We have a glimmer of like, I really want to thank that person, but it can never be enough. So I won't say anything. Or,
Mm,
I'm going to hold back here, or I couldn't possibly do enough. So I'm not going to do anything. And you start to realize those self-imposed limitations and you think, I don't need that. I can stretch, I can have a little adventure in giving or presence or thanking somebody or something like that. So I
yeah.
enjoyed a lot just thinking of real life examples and also talking to other people and kind of gathering their wisdom together in the book. So I follow the course in a way of the Seder. Like, when do we feel most confined? What do we do about? What do we want to take on a journey like that? What do we want to leave behind? Um,
Mm.
you know, and how do we open to the pleasure and the joy and the delight? And then, like the Seder ends in aspiration next year in Jerusalem, symbolically, I ends in aspiration.
Mm.
Let's carry it forward. And
So from your sort of, your age, and you've been doing this for, well, I'm not saying it's incredibly advanced. I'm just saying your
it's incredibly
perspective in life.
advanced.
Well, you've been doing this, for a long time, like Pema, like,
Yeah.
your colleagues, Jack, and, you know, and you look at this world of ours, which is so full of joy and so full of wonderful, amazing things that we all love and also sort of take for granted sometimes. And then it's also so full of like perpetual racism and otherism and, you know, war and just awful things, you know, authoritarianism, how, how do you feel like, what is your aspiration for all of us together as a community?
I I do aspire, and I actually believe in the possibility of a very different world, because just like, as an individual meditator, as one being, I know that the revelation of really the monsters and the beautiful monsters in my own experience is an important stage. I have to know how to deal with them and work with them and all of that. But the very first seeing of them was always like, whoa, it's dreadful, and then moving on to a better way of like a better holding environment for all of that. Like I'm someone famous in the community I formed way back when I was first practicing in India in the 70s. For once having marched up to my teacher, SN Goenka, and looking at him and saying, I never used to be an angry person before I started meditating, thereby laying exactly where I felt it belonged, which was on him, Clearly it was his fault. Feel really clearly I'd been usually angry, but I hadn't seen it.
Yeah.
So I just hadn't done any introspection. And then there it was. And then learning how to deal with it. I kind of hope that we're in that kind of phase in terms of the collective. We're seeing
Right.
so much more clearly the racism and the homophobia and the way we just put other people down or, animals. I
Right.
mean, just like the separations, the disconnection. And as it becomes clearer, just like for an individual, I'm hoping that we have a different sense of that holding environment, like uh not to lose hope and but not too stupid either,
Yeah.
And these are very real and grave issues
Yeah.
and to know that we can help one another in that kind of journey as well. I mean I really do have that sort of optimism, you could say.
The, yeah. On the sort of public facing side, um, you know, I am thinking about politics right now a lot with the Supreme Court striking down like clean air, clean water provisions and, you know, uh, women's rights and LGBTQ plus rights. And, there is, do you encourage people from a kind of Buddhist point of view, whether they're Buddhist or not, to be active, whether it's politics or not, active on the streets, voting, all that kind of practical stuff?
I'm totally into it. voting. I'm sort of a fanatic about it. You and I should join together election year, like,
Yeah. We do a
uh,
lot, yoga world and last round with Biden and all that. We did a lot. We'd love to
yeah.
join you.
No, I've written a lot about it, and sometimes, there's disagreements or, discontent coming my way, but it's so important to me, it's like,
Yeah.
what else can you do? But
Well, it's also the approach. Like we're not trying to be like hateful toward other people. We're just trying to stand up for like basic democratic rights and common sense
yeah,
and
yeah,
maybe children not being afraid of being shot all the time. And, you know, we're always getting into trouble and losing fans over stuff too, but we're not trying to egg people on, I
yeah,
guess.
yeah, yeah, yeah. No, voting especially is very close to my heart.
Oh, good. Well,
It's
let's do something next,
let's do something.
whenever that is.
Very soon.
I really appreciate you and your new book, and it's so timely. I've been incredibly privileged in many ways, and I had a really hard year. So I'm very excited to read this, and I need it. And I think many of us do.
That's great. Well, let's be in touch for sure.
All right, Sharon, thank you so much.
Thank
Everyone go
you.
follow Sharon Salzberg up there and get that book, Real Life. All right.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.